Richard Marshall thought he was untouchable. Standing behind the marble counter of the first-class lounge, he looked at a woman in a hoodie and decided she was trash. He didn't just deny her boarding. He ripped her ticket to shreds and laughed in her face. But Richard made a fatal miscalculation. He didn't know that the woman he was humiliating wasn't just a passenger. She was the billionaire who had secretly purchased the airline 72 hours ago. This is the story of how one act of arrogance turned a manager into a memory. The automatic sliding doors of JFK's Terminal 4 hissed open, letting in a gust of biting November wind and the scent of jet fuel mixed with damp concrete. Dr. Arlene Bissett adjusted the hood of her oversized beige cashmere sweater, pulling it slightly forward to shield her face from the harsh fluorescent glare. She was tired. It had been a 20-hour negotiation in Tokyo, followed by a connecting flight that had been delayed 3 times, and now she just wanted to get home to London. She wasn't dressed like a typical first-class passenger, at least not the kind Sky Imperial Airlines usually courted. She wore comfortable joggers, worn-in sneakers that cost more than most people's rent, though they looked unassuming, and a simple leather backpack slung over one shoulder. She held her passport and a printed boarding pass loosely in her hand. The first-class check-in area for Sky Imperial was designed to intimidate. It was separated from the chaotic economy lines by velvet ropes and frosted glass panels etched with the airline's Golden Eagle logo. The carpet here was plush, silence was enforced, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and money. Behind the marble counter stood Richard "Rick" Marshall. Rick was the station manager, a man who wore his uniform like a suit of armor. His tie was knotted with mathematical precision, his hair was gelled into an immovable helmet, and his eyes scanned the terminal with the predatory focus of a hawk looking for field mice. Rick didn't just work for Sky Imperial, he believed he was Sky Imperial. He was currently gunning for a promotion to regional director, and he believed the key to securing it was brand integrity. In Rick's mind, brand integrity meant ensuring that the first-class lounge didn't look like a bus station. Arlene approached the counter. There was no line. She placed her passport and boarding pass on the cool marble. "Good evening," Arlene said, her voice soft and raspy from exhaustion. "Checking in for flight 402 to Heathrow." Rick didn't look up immediately. He finished typing something on his keyboard, took a slow sip of his sparkling water, and then, only when the silence became awkward, did he slowly raise his eyes. He scanned Arlene from her hood to her sneakers and back up again. His lip curled slightly, a micro-expression of disgust that he didn't bother to hide. "This is the first-class priority lane," Rick said, his voice dripping with icy condescension. He didn't touch her documents. "Economy check-in is down the hall, past the restrooms. You can't miss it. It's the one with the long line." Arlene blinked, too tired for a fight, but too seasoned to be dismissed. "I know where economy is. I'm flying first class. My ticket is right there." Rick let out a short, sharp laugh, shaking his head as if she had told a quaint joke. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. This line is for full-fare, paying premium passengers. Sky Imperial prides itself on exclusivity. If you're looking for an upgrade or standby, you need to go to the service desk. We don't do handouts here." "It's not a handout," Arlene said, her patience thinning. She tapped the boarding pass. "It's a paid ticket. Scan it." Rick finally touched the paper. He picked it up between 2 fingers as if it were contaminated waste. He glanced at the name. "Bissett, eh?" And then looked back at her. "Bissett," he muttered. "Look, Miss Bissett, I've been in this industry for 15 years. I know what a first-class passenger looks like, and I know what a fraud looks like. We've had a rash of people using stolen credit cards and fake printouts to try and sneak into the lounge for the free champagne. I'm not going to let that happen on my watch." Arlene straightened her back. The fatigue in her eyes was replaced by a cold, sharp steeliness. "Are you accusing me of fraud because I'm wearing sweatpants? Or is it something else, Mr. Marshall?" She read the name tag on his chest. Rick's face flushed. He hated being challenged. I am accusing you of being in the wrong line. Now please take your belonging and leave before I call security to escort you out. You are disturbing the atmosphere for our legitimate clientele." Behind Arlene, a couple in tailored suits arrived, the Vanderbilts, regulars on this route. Rick's demeanor changed instantly. He flashed a bright, obsequious smile, leaning over the counter. "Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt, so good to see you again. Please just one moment while I clear some debris from the counter." He gestured dismissively at Arlene. "Move along." Arlene didn't move. She planted her feet. "I'm not debris, and I'm not moving until you check me in. I suggest you type my name into your system, Mr. Marshall. If you don't, you are going to regret it." Rick stopped smiling. He looked at the Vanderbilts, offering an apologetic shrug, then turned his full, venomous attention back to Arlene. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Listen to me," he hissed. "I don't know who you think you are, or what kind of affirmative action quota you think applies here, but it doesn't work on me. I run this terminal. I decide who flies. And you? You aren't flying. Not today. Not on my plane." He grabbed her boarding pass. With a dramatic flair intended to impress the wealthy couple behind her, he ripped the document in half, then in half again, and dropped the pieces into the trash bin behind him. "Next guest, please," Rick boomed, looking right through Arlene. The sound of the tearing paper seemed to echo through the high ceilings of the terminal. For a moment, Arlene just stared at the trash bin where her boarding pass and her identity as a passenger had been discarded. The Vanderbilts looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Vanderbilt, a woman clutching a Birkin bag, whispered something to her husband, looking nervously at Arlene. But they didn't intervene. They simply stepped around her as Rick beckoned them forward with a sweeping hand gesture. "So sorry for the delay," Rick cooed, typing rapidly. "We have to be vigilant. Security is our top priority." Arlene didn't shout. She didn't scream. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She wasn't recording. Not yet. She was checking the time. 7:45 p.m. The board meeting for the acquisition finalization was scheduled for tomorrow morning in London, but she had the emergency direct line to the Global Operations Center saved in her contacts. "You shouldn't have done that," Arlene said calmly. Her voice cut through Rick's schmoozing. Rick slammed his hand on the counter, making the Vanderbilts jump. "Security!" he shouted, waving to two uniformed officers standing near the entrance. "Over here! We have a disruptive passenger refusing to vacate the premium area." The terminal was busy. People in the economy line had turned their heads. A few younger passengers had their phones out, sensing a viral moment. The sight of a white male manager yelling at a solitary black woman was already drawing attention. Two security guards, Mike and trembling rookie Sarah, jogged over. Mike looked weary. He knew Rick Marshall. He knew Rick was a tyrant who called security if his coffee was too cold. "What's the problem, Mr. Marshall?" Mike asked, hitching up his belt. "She's trespassing," Rick spat, pointing a finger mere inches from Arlene's face. "She presented a fraudulent ticket. I denied her boarding, and now she's refusing to leave and threatening me. I want her removed from the terminal and put her on the no-fly list for aggression." Arlene looked at Mike. "Officer, I have a valid digital copy of my ticket on my phone. This man just destroyed my physical copy without checking my identification. I am asking you to verify my identity before you touch me." Mike looked at Arlene. She seemed calm. Too calm, ma'am. "If I could just see—" "No," Rick interjected, stepping out from behind the counter. He towered over Arlene, using his physical size to intimidate. "I am the station manager. Under FAA regulations, if I deem a passenger a security risk, they are a risk. She threatened me. She said I would regret it. That is a threat against airline staff. That is a federal offense. Get her out of here, Mike, or I'll be calling your supervisor at the TSA to report you for incompetence, too." Rick was playing to the crowd now. He felt powerful. He saw the cameras pointing at him and thought he looked like a hero protecting the sanctity of the airport. He turned to the crowd, raising his voice. "This is what happens when people think rules don't apply to them," Rick announced, like a ringmaster. "Sky Imperial is a world-class airline. We don't tolerate scammers." Arlene took a step back, not in fear, but to create space. She held up her phone, screen facing Rick. "Mr. Marshall," she said, her voice rising just enough to be heard by the bystanders. "My name is Dr. Arlene Bissett. I am not a scammer. I am asking you one last time to look at your screen and check my booking reference. If you remove me from this airport, you are making a mistake that you cannot undo." "I don't care if you're the Queen of England," Rick sneered, his face red. "You are garbage, and garbage goes in the bin. Mike, grab her." Mike hesitated. He looked at Arlene's shoes. He recognized the brand. Loro Piana. He looked at the backpack. The row. Mike wasn't rich, but he read magazines. This woman wasn't broke. "Mr. Marshall, maybe we should just check the system real quick," Mike suggested. "I gave you a direct order," Rick screamed, spittle flying. "She is aggressive. She is blacklisted as of this second. Remove her now." At that moment, a young woman ran up from the gate area. It was Jessica, the gate supervisor. She looked pale. She was holding a tablet that was pinging frantically. "Rick! Rick!" Jessica gasped, out of breath. "Stop! Please!" Rick spun around. "Not now, Jessica. I'm dealing with a security threat." "No, Rick, you don't understand," Jessica said, her voice trembling. She looked at Arlene with wide, terrified eyes. "We just got a priority red alert from Global HQ. The system, it's flagging a VIP code we've never seen before. It's overriding the entire manifest." Rick rolled his eyes. "It's probably a glitch. The system has been buggy all week." "It's not a glitch," Jessica whispered, turning the tablet so Rick could see. "The name on the override is Bissett. Arlene Bissett." Rick froze. He looked at the tablet. He looked at Arlene. Arlene smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just watched the trap snap shut. "Actually, Jessica," Arlene said, her voice smooth as silk, "it's not just a VIP code. Tell Mr. Marshall what the designation code X01 Prokuitai stands for." Jessica swallowed hard, her hands shaking. It stands for Executive Owner, Sole Proprietor." The silence that fell over Terminal 4 was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The phones that were recording zoomed in on Rick's face, which was draining of color so fast he looked like a corpse standing upright. "Owner," Rick squeaked. His voice cracked. "But Sky Imperial is owned by the Benchmark Group." "Benchmark sold the controlling stake 3 days ago," Arlene said, taking a step toward Rick. He shrank back, hitting the counter. "To my private equity firm, Artemis Capital. I'm not just a passenger, Mr. Marshall. As of 72 hours ago, I am your employer, and I decided to fly commercial today to see how my new employees treat their customers. And you have been very, very informative." Arlene turned to Mike, the security guard. "Officer, I believe this man is currently trespassing on my property. He is no longer an employee of Sky Imperial Airlines. Would you mind escorting him out? He's disturbing the atmosphere for the legitimate clientele." Rick's knees gave way. He slumped against the marble, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. The drama was far from over. In fact, the real dismantling of Richard Marshall was just beginning. The silence that had descended upon Terminal 4 was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air in the cabin before the masks drop. It was a silence that carried the weight of a guillotine blade hovering at the top of its track. Richard Marshall was still leaning against the back counter, his knuckles white as he gripped the marble edge for support. His brain, usually a well-oiled machine of corporate jargon and policy loopholes, was misfiring. "Owner?" The word bounced around his skull, refusing to settle. It wasn't possible. Owners were old men in suits who sat in boardrooms in Geneva or Delaware. Owners were faceless entities. Owners were not women in hoodies standing in his terminal, being told to go to the back of the line. He looked at Jessica, the young gate supervisor. She was staring at the floor, distancing herself from him physically and spiritually. He looked at Mike, the security guard. Mike had actually taken a step back, his hand moving away from his belt, signaling a complete withdrawal of support. Rick forced a laugh. It came out sounding like a dry cough. This is a very elaborate joke," Rick stammered, his eyes darting between Arlene and the bystanders. He pointed a shaking finger at the phone, recording him. "You're a YouTuber, aren't you? This is a prank channel. You got a fake code, hacked the system." "Ha, very clever. I'm going to have the FBI look into this hacking." Arlene didn't blink. She didn't raise her voice. She simply tapped the marble counter with her index finger. Tap, tap, tap. A sound that seemed to boom louder than the terminal announcements. "Jessica," Arlene said, keeping her eyes locked on Rick, "read the full corporate memo attached to the X01 code. Out loud, please." Jessica fumbled with the tablet, her fingers trembling so much she almost dropped it. She cleared her throat. It says, "Effective immediately. Ownership of Sky Imperial Global and all subsidiaries has transferred to Artemis Capital. Dr. Arlene Bissett assumes the role of executive chairman. All station managers are to provide unconditional clearance and support. Any obstruction of Dr. Bissett is grounds for immediate termination with cause." Jessica stopped reading. She looked up at Rick. "Rick, the memo is signed by the board of directors. It was time-stamped 3 days ago. It's real." Rick's face went from red to a sickly ash grey. The adrenaline that had fueled his arrogance was now turning into a cold, toxic sludge in his veins. He looked at the Vanderbilts. Mr. Vanderbilt was hurriedly putting his phone away, looking at the ceiling, pretending he hadn't just witnessed the execution of a man's career. Rick started, his voice barely a whisper. He tried to straighten his tie, a reflex of a man who thought appearance could save him from reality. "Dr. Bissett, ma'am, obviously there has been a misunderstanding, a breakdown in communication. If you had known I had money, you would have treated me with respect," Arlene finished for him. Her voice was low, smooth, and terrified him more than if she had screamed. "Is that the policy you run this station with, Mr. Marshall? Respect is purchased, dignity is a premium add-on." No, of course not," Rick said quickly, his hands waving in front of him. "We value all our customers. But you have to understand, from my perspective, the hood, the lack of luggage, I was protecting the airline. Protecting your assets, really. I'm a sheepdog guarding the flock. Sometimes the sheepdog barks at the wrong person." He offered a weak, sycophantic smile, hoping for a connection. "We're both management," his eyes pleaded. "We understand the burden of command." Arlene stared at him for a long, uncomfortable 10 seconds. She let him sweat. She let the silence stretch until Rick began to physically twitch. "You called me garbage," Arlene said. Rick flinched. I was speaking metaphorically about the ticket situation. "You tore up my boarding pass," she continued, ignoring his interruption. "You threw it in the trash, and you told me that garbage belongs in the bin." She took a slow step closer to the counter. The barrier that Rick had used as his shield was now a trap. "I need that boarding pass, Mr. Marshall," Arlene said softly. Rick looked at her, confused. I can print a new one. Right here. Let me just upgrade you to Suite 1A. Best seat in the fleet. Champagne is on ice. Let me just—" He reached for the keyboard. "No," Arlene stopped him. "I don't want a new one. I want the one you held. The one you touched. The one you decided wasn't good enough." She pointed a manicured finger at the sleek, brushed steel trash bin sitting behind the counter, next to Rick's polished shoes. "Retrieve it." The air left the room. The crowd, which had grown to about 50 people now, pressed in against the velvet ropes. Phones were held high. This was the moment. Rick stared at the bin. "Mom?" "You heard me," Arlene said, her voice hardening into diamond. "You threw my property in the trash. You treated my identity like refuse. If you want to keep your job for even 5 more minutes, if you want to walk out of this airport with a reference instead of a lawsuit, you will reach into that bin and you will tape my boarding pass back together." Rick looked at the security guards. Mike looked away. He looked at Jessica. She bit her lip and looked down. He was alone. The humiliation washed over him in waves. He was Richard Marshall. He drove a Porsche. He had a summer house in the Hamptons. He did not dig in the trash. "Doctor." "Bissett, this is unreasonable," Rick hissed, trying to keep his voice low so the crowd wouldn't hear. "People are watching." "I know," Arlene said. "They're watching the station manager demonstrate his dedication to customer service. Dig." It took a moment where Rick's pride fought a losing battle against his mortgage, his car payments, and his fear. Slowly, painfully, he bent his knees. He crouched down behind the marble counter, disappearing from the view of the crowd for a second, before the top of his gelled head reappeared. He reached into the bin. It was mostly filled with paper receipts and luggage tag backings, but it was still a trash bin. He fished around. His hand brushed against a sticky coffee cup. He winced. "Find all the pieces, Rick," Arlene commanded from above. "Don't leave any part of me in the garbage." He found the 4 jagged squares of the boarding pass. He stood up, his face burning with a heat that felt like a sunburn. He placed the pieces on the marble counter. His hands were shaking so badly the paper fluttered. "Tape," Arlene said. Rick grabbed the Scotch tape dispenser. With clumsy, fumbling fingers, he taped the document back together. It was a mess, crinkled, torn, sad-looking. But it was whole. He pushed it toward her. He couldn't meet her eyes. He looked at her sneakers. "There," he choked out. Arlene picked up the taped boarding pass. She examined it like it was a rare artifact. She folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. "Thank you, Rick," she said. "Now, since my ticket is verified, I believe I have a flight to catch, and since you are so concerned with security, I think I need a personal escort to the gate. I wouldn't want to get lost and end up in the wrong line again." She turned her back on him, adjusting her backpack. "Grab my bag," she said over her shoulder. "The leather one. It's heavy. Try not to rip it." The walk from the check-in counters of Terminal 4 to Gate A6 is a long one. It involves passing through the main atrium, navigating the duty-free labyrinth, and walking down a corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that look out onto the tarmac. Usually Rick walked this route like a king surveying his kingdom. He walked fast, chin up, barking orders into his radio, ignoring the sea of passengers unless one of them looked important enough to acknowledge. Today the procession was different. Arlene walked ahead, setting a leisurely pace. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew he was there. Rick followed 3 steps behind, clutching Arlene's worn leather backpack against his chest. It wasn't actually that heavy, but to Rick, it felt like he was carrying a tombstone. The bag clashed with his pristine uniform. He looked like a bellboy who had aged poorly. The worst part was the gauntlet. News travels fast in an airport. The ecosystem of a terminal is tight-knit. Gate agents text ramp agents, who text flight attendants, who text the cleaners. By the time Arlene and Rick cleared the TSA checkpoint, where the officers, having heard the commotion, waved Arlene through with wide eyes and gave Rick suspicious glares, the rumor mill was already spinning. "The owner is here." Rick stepped in it, big time. She's making him carry her bag. As they passed the duty-free shops, store clerks leaned out of doorways to watch. Other Sky Imperial ground staff, usually terrified of Rick, stood in small clusters, whispering behind their hands. Rick saw a ramp agent he had written up last week for wearing the wrong color socks. The agent saw Rick carrying the bag, saw the sweat dripping down Rick's temple, and a slow, wide grin spread across his face. He gave Rick a thumbs up. Rick wanted to vomit. Pick up the pace, Mr. Marshall, Arlene said, not turning around. We don't want to delay the flight. On-time performance is a key metric, isn't it? Yes, Dr. Bissett, Rick grunted, jogging slightly to catch up. You know, Arlene said, her tone conversational, as if they were old friends strolling through a park. I've been reviewing the financials for this station. JFK is our flagship hub, highest revenue. Yet, interestingly, it has the highest rate of customer complaints regarding staff attitude in the entire network. Rick swallowed hard. New York is a tough market. Passengers are aggressive. Is that so? Arlene stopped walking. They were in the middle of the concourse. People flowed around them like water around a rock. She turned to face him. I looked at the specific complaints, Rick. A lot of them mention a manager with slicked back hair who refuses refunds, denies valid upgrades, and talks down to families. There was a complaint 2 months ago from a veteran. He had a service dog. You told him the dog looked dirty and made him buy a crate or leave. Do you remember that? Rick's throat was dry. I follow the sanitary guidelines. The dog was a golden retriever, Arlene said. The passenger was a Purple Heart recipient. He missed his niece's wedding because of you. I called him yesterday personally to apologize. He told me you laughed at him. Rick looked at the floor. I didn't laugh. I might have chuckled at the situation. It was a misunderstanding. You have a lot of misunderstandings, Rick, Arlene said quietly. It seems like your entire career is one long misunderstanding of what it means to be a human being. She started walking again. Come along, the plane is waiting. They reached Gate A6. The boarding area was packed. The flight was full. When the passengers saw Rick, the man who had screamed at the woman earlier, approaching, a hush fell over the gate area. Then someone started to clap. It began with a single person, maybe the guy who had recorded the video. Then a few others joined in. It wasn't a thunderous ovation, but it was a smattering of sarcastic, mocking applause directed at the man clutching the backpack. Rick kept his eyes fixed on the blue carpet. He felt naked. At the podium stood the gate agents, Brenda and Marcus. Brenda was a woman in her 60s who had worked for the airline since it was a single-plane operation. Rick had tried to fire her 3 times for moving too slow. Brenda saw Arlene. She saw the code on her screen. She saw Rick carrying the bag. Brenda stood up straighter than she had in years. She picked up the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Brenda's voice boomed over the PA system. We are ready to begin boarding for Flight 402 to London Heathrow. We would like to welcome our special guest, Dr. Arlene Bissett. And she paused, looking at Rick over her spectacles, and her baggage handler. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Rick's face turned a deep, violent shade of purple. Scan me in, Brenda, Arlene said, approaching the podium. With pleasure, Dr. Bissett. Brenda smiled warmly. I have you in seat 1A. The captain has been notified. Arlene turned to Rick. Give me my bag. Rick handed it over. His hands were cramping from gripping it so tight. You're not done, Arlene said. I need you to escort me to my seat. I want to make sure the cabin is up to your high standards. They walked down the jet bridge. The tunnel was cold and echoed with their footsteps. This was the final stretch, the transition from the ground to the air. Arlene stepped onto the plane. The chief purser, a tall woman named Eleanor, with a sharp bob and sharper eyes, was waiting at the door. Welcome aboard, Dr. Bissett, Elena said, bowing her head slightly. An honor to have you. Thank you, Elena, Arlene said. Please don't let me disrupt the service. I'm just a passenger today. Elena looked past Arlene and saw Rick hovering in the doorway. Elena's expression hardened. She knew Rick. Everyone knew Rick. Mr. Marshall, Elena said, her voice dropping 20 degrees. Are you traveling with us? He's just ensuring I'm settled, Arlene said, moving into the first-class cabin. The cabin was a sanctuary of cream leather, walnut wood, and soft ambient lighting. It was luxury personified. Arlene walked to seat 1A, a private suite with sliding doors. She placed her backpack on the ottoman. She sat down and sighed, letting the exhaustion of the day finally hit her physically. She looked up. Rick was standing in the aisle, looking like a lost child. He was blocking the way for the other first-class passengers who were starting to board. "Mr. Marshall," Arlene said. "Yes?" Rick asked, hope flaring in his chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe she would let him go. Maybe she would say, "Lesson learned," and he could go back to his office and hide. "Do you know why I bought this airline?" she asked. Rick shook his head. "Investment? The roots?" "I bought it because I love aviation," Arlene said. "I love the idea that we can connect people, that we can bridge distances. But you don't connect people, Rick. You build walls. You are a gatekeeper in the worst sense of the word." She leaned forward. "I want you to stay here for a moment. The captain is coming out to do his pre-flight greeting. I want you to introduce me to him, since you are the station manager, and this is your ship." Rick heard heavy footsteps coming from the cockpit. Captain Harrison appeared. He was a man of few words, a former Air Force pilot with grey hair and bars on his shoulders that commanded instant respect. He had feuded with Rick for years over fuel loads and turnaround times. Captain Harrison stepped into the aisle. He saw Arlene. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Dr. Bissett," Harrison said, extending a hand. "Welcome to the family. We've been waiting for a leadership change for a long time." He shook Arlene's hand vigorously. Then he turned to Rick. The smile vanished. "Marshall," the captain nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture. "You're blocking the aisle. We have a slot time to hit. Unless you're flying the plane, get off my jet." Rick looked at Arlene. She had already opened a menu and was ignoring him. She had dismissed him without saying a word. He was no longer a threat. He was just an obstruction. "Aye," Rick stammered. "Goodbye, Rick," Arlene said, not looking up. "I'll see you in my office on Monday, 9 a.m. Don't be late, and bring your badge." Rick turned around. He had to walk back up the aisle, against the flow of boarding passengers. He had to squeeze past the Vanderbilts, past the business tycoons, past the people he had spent his life trying to impress. He had to say, "Excuse me, sorry, excuse me," as he brushed past them, heading back out into the cold terminal, stripping him of his armor piece by piece. He was a man walking toward his own professional funeral, and he knew it. The walk back up the jet bridge was, for Richard Marshall, a journey through a vacuum. The air felt thinner, sharper. He passed the line of first-class passengers still waiting to board, men in Italian suits, women with Louis Vuitton carry-ons, the very people he had spent 15 years emulating and prioritizing. Now, they looked at him not as a gatekeeper of exclusivity, but as an obstacle. A man in a sweaty uniform going the wrong way. "Excuse me," Rick muttered, turning sideways to squeeze past a businessman. The man didn't move, forcing Rick to press himself against the cold, corrugated metal wall of the tunnel. When he finally burst back out into the gate area, the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't just the clapping anymore. It was the whispering. It was the eyes. Hundreds of eyes. The gate agents, Brenda and Marcus, were busy scanning tickets, but the moment Rick appeared, Brenda stopped. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked at him with a profound, terrifying pity. It was the look one gives to a car wreck that has already happened. There is nothing left to do but stare at the damage. Rick didn't return to the check-in counter. He couldn't. The marble podium that had been his throne now felt like a scaffold. Instead, he ducked into the staff-only corridor, swiping his badge with a trembling hand. The beep of the lock opening sounded like a mocking laugh. He found refuge in the station manager's office, a glass-walled box overlooking the tarmac. He slammed the door and locked it. He pulled the blinds down, shutting out the view of the planes he claimed to command. He collapsed into his ergonomic chair, the leather creaking under his weight. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "She can't fire me," he told himself, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "I have union protections. I have tenure. I followed protocol. She was aggressive. I can spin this." He pulled his phone from his pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it on the desk. He picked it up and opened social media. His stomach bottomed out. It had been less than 40 minutes since the incident, but the internet moves faster than a supersonic jet. The video was everywhere. It was trending on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. #SkyImperialKaren was the hashtag, but it wasn't a woman being labeled a Karen. It was him. The video was captioned, "Airline manager tries to shame black owner of the airline. Instant regret." Rick pressed play. He watched himself. He saw the sneer on his face, the way he ripped the paper. He saw the arrogance. It looked worse on a small screen. It looked villainous. But the comments were a digital firing squad. Asterisk, "I fly out of JFK all the time. This guy is a nightmare. He once made me weigh my carry-on 3 times just to be a jerk." Asterisk, "Name is Richard Marshall. He's been a tyrant at Terminal 4 for years. Karma didn't just knock. She bought the building." Asterisk, "Look at his face when she says she owns the fleet. Priceless." Rick threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a crack, leaving a dent in the drywall before clattering to the carpet. He put his head in his hands. The silence of the office was broken only by the muffled roar of engines outside. He was alone. For the first time in his career, the phone on his desk wasn't ringing. No one was calling to ask for approval. No one was calling to ask for a schedule change. He had been ghosted by his own subordinates. Meanwhile, 30,000 feet above him, the atmosphere was very different. Flight 402 had reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign pinged off. In Suite 1A, Arlene Bissett reclined her seat. She wasn't drinking champagne. She was drinking herbal tea, reviewing a thick stack of documents she had pulled from her backpack. The curtains to her suite parted gently. It was the chief purser, Margaret, formerly Eleanor's superior. Margaret was a veteran of the skies, a woman who had seen everything from births to deaths at altitude. She carried a small tray with a warm towel. "Dr. Bissett," Margaret said softly, "is everything to your liking?" Arlene looked up, taking off her reading glasses. "The service is impeccable, Margaret, as always, but please sit for a moment. I need to ask you something off the record." Margaret hesitated. It was strictly against protocol for crew to sit with passengers, but the owner made the rules. She perched on the edge of the ottoman opposite Arlene. "Of course, ma'am." "Rick Marshall," Arlene said. The name seemed to lower the cabin pressure. "I know what happened on the ground was theatrical, but I need to know the day-to-day reality. You fly this route 3 times a month. You deal with his station. Be honest. Is today an anomaly, or is this the culture?" Margaret looked at her hands. She twisted the silver ring on her finger. She had a pension to protect. But she looked into Arlene's eyes and saw genuine concern, not just a witch hunt. "It's not an anomaly, Dr. Bissett," Margaret said quietly, her voice trembling slightly with the release of years of frustration. "It's a regime. Rick runs JFK like his personal fiefdom. He targets crew members he doesn't like, assigns them to gate standby for hours. He manipulates the overtime roster. If you don't bring him a coffee from the inbound flight, he loses your crew transport paperwork, and we're stuck at the curb for an hour waiting for the bus." Arlene's eyes narrowed. "He manipulates the overtime roster." "Yes," Margaret whispered. "We suspect. Well, there have been rumors for years. Ghost shifts. Names on the ground staff roster who are clocked in, but aren't actually at the terminal. The money goes somewhere. But nobody reports it because Rick is friends with the regional director. Or he was." Arlene sat up straighter, the tea forgotten. This was no longer just about a rudeness complaint. This was about embezzlement. This was about corporate malfeasance. "Thank you, Margaret," Arlene said, her voice icy and precise. "You have been incredibly helpful. You can return to your duties. And Margaret—" "Yes, Dr. Bissett. If anyone asks, we just discussed the lunch menu." "Understood, Ma'am." Arlene waited until the curtain closed. She picked up her satellite phone. She dialed a number that bypassed the switchboards and went straight to a glass office in London. "It's Arlene," she said when the line connected. "Get the forensic accounting team ready and call legal. I want a full audit of the JFK station operations for the last 5 years. Payroll, vendor contracts, overtime logs, everything. Have it on my desk by Monday morning. We aren't just firing a manager, David. We're cleaning the house." The weekend passed for Richard Marshall like a fever dream. He didn't sleep. He paced his living room in his pristine suburban house, the television on mute, flashing images of the airline's stock price, which had actually risen slightly on the news of the active ownership intervention. The world was cheering for his executioner. He tried to draft a resignation letter, then deleted it. He tried to draft an apology speech, but it sounded hollow. He drank too much scotch on Saturday night and woke up Sunday with a headache that felt like a drill bit in his temple. By Monday morning, Rick was a shell. He showered, the hot water doing nothing to warm the cold dread in his gut. He shaved, nicking his chin, a small cut that wouldn't stop bleeding, forcing him to dab it with a tissue until the last minute. He put on his best suit, a charcoal Brooks Brothers number that usually made him feel invincible. Today, it felt like a costume. He drove to the Sky Imperial Global Headquarters, a massive glass spire in downtown Manhattan, not the airport. The drive was slow, the traffic relentless. Every red light felt like a reprieve. Every green light felt like a push toward the cliff edge. He parked in the visitor's lot. He didn't have his executive spot anymore. His parking pass had been deactivated remotely on Saturday morning. He had to take a ticket from the machine. The indignity of paying to be fired stung his eyes. He walked into the lobby. It was a cathedral of corporate power, soaring ceilings, abstract art, and a security desk manned by 3 guards who looked far more serious than the ones at the airport. Rick approached the turnstiles. He reached for his badge, clipped to his belt, and tapped it against the sensor. Busy T. Red light. He tried again. Busy T. "Excuse me," Rick said to the guard, forcing a smile. "My badge seems to be demagnetized. I'm Richard Marshall, station manager, JFK. I have a 9 a.m. with Dr. Bissett." The guard, a large man with a stone face, looked down at a clipboard. He didn't check the computer. He checked a paper list. "Mr. Marshall," the guard said, his voice echoing in the cavernous lobby. "We've been expecting you. Please stand to the side. You are not cleared for unescorted entry." I work here," Rick stammered, conscious of the other employees streaming past him, people he used to nod to in the elevator. Now they averted their eyes, clutching their coffees, sensing the contagion of failure. "Not anymore, sir. Not until cleared," the guard said. "Wait here." Rick stood by the wall. 10 minutes passed, then 15. It was 8:55 a.m. He was going to be late. Being late was a cardinal sin in Rick's book. He checked his watch frantically. Finally, at 8:58 a.m., a young woman in a sharp grey suit appeared. She wasn't an assistant. She was from legal. Rick recognized her type. Shark eyes, no smile, holding a thick binder. "Mr. Marshall," she said, "I'm Miss Vance, Associate General Counsel. Follow me." She didn't shake his hand. She turned and swiped her badge. The turnstile opened. Rick scurried after her like a dog off the leash. They rode the elevator to the 40th floor, the executive level. The air pressure changed, popping Rick's ears. The doors opened onto a plush carpet that felt like walking on moss. The silence here was absolute. No phones ringing, no typing, just the hum of power. Miss Vance led him down a long corridor lined with portraits of past CEOs. They all seemed to be glaring at Rick. They reached the double doors of the boardroom. Miss Vance stopped. "Mr. Marshall," she said, her hand on the handle, "before we go in, I am advising you that this meeting is being recorded for legal purposes. You have the right to have a union representative present, but since you waived that right in your email yesterday to expedite this meeting, we are proceeding. Do you understand?" Yes, Rick said. "I just want to explain. I want to apologize to Dr. Bissett personally." Miss Vance's expression didn't change. "This isn't an apology meeting, Mr. Marshall." She pushed the doors open. The boardroom was massive. A table long enough to land a plane on dominated the center. At the far end, framed by the panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, sat Arlene Bissett. She wasn't wearing the hoodie today. She was wearing a navy power suit, cut to perfection. Her hair was pulled back. She looked regal, terrifying, and utterly in control. But she wasn't alone. To her right sat the head of human resources. To her left sat a man Rick didn't know, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and a laptop open in front of him. And standing in the corner were two men in dark suits who looked uncomfortably like federal agents. "Sit down, Rick," Arlene said. Her voice didn't echo. It cut. Rick walked the length of the table. His legs felt like jelly. He pulled out the chair at the opposite end, facing her. The distance between them was 20 feet, but it felt like miles. "Dr. Bissett," Rick began, his voice cracking. "I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for my behavior on Friday. It was inexcusable. I was stressed. I was not myself. I have written a formal apology to you and the Vanderbilts, and I'm willing to undergo sensitivity training, unpaid suspension, whatever it takes to—" "Stop," Arlene said. She didn't shout. She just held up a hand. She picked up a remote control and clicked it. A screen descended from the ceiling behind her. Rick expected to see the video from the airport. He prepared himself to cringe. But the screen didn't show the airport. It showed a spreadsheet. A complex, colorful spreadsheet with rows and rows of data highlighted in red. "Do you know what this is, Rick?" Arlene asked. Rick squinted. He saw column headers, JFK ground staff, overtime hours, vendor dispersals. His blood ran cold. "This is the payroll audit for JFK Terminal 4 for the fiscal years 2021 through 2024, Arlene said, her voice dry and academic. "We spent the weekend looking at it. It's quite a fascinating document." She clicked the remote again. The screen zoomed in on a list of 5 names. "These 5 employees," Arlene said. "According to your logs, they worked an average of 60 hours of overtime per month for the last 2 years. They are your highest earners, very industrious." She paused, leaning forward. "The only problem, Rick, is that these 5 people don't exist. Their social security numbers are dead ends. The bank accounts their wages are deposited into, however, are very real. They are shell accounts registered in the Cayman Islands." Rick couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. I don't know what that is. That's a clerical error. That's HR's fault. "We traced the IP address used to approve these timesheets," the man with the wire-rimmed glasses spoke up for the first time. "It matches the desktop computer in your office, Rick, and the transfer routing numbers for the offshore accounts. They link back to an LLC that lists your wife as the principal beneficiary." Arlene placed the remote on the table. The click sounded like a gunshot. "I didn't bring you here to fire you for being rude to me, Rick," Arlene said softly. "I can handle rudeness. I have thick skin. I brought you here to tell you that Sky Imperial is pressing charges." "Charges?" Rick whispered. "Embezzlement, wire fraud, falsification of corporate records." Arlene listed them off on her fingers. "We estimate you've stolen approximately $1.2 million from this airline over the last 4 years. You didn't just humiliated a passenger. You've been robbing the company blind while preaching about integrity and security." She nodded to the 2 men in the corner. They stepped forward. One of them pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "This isn't a performance review, Rick," Arlene said, standing up as the agents approached him. "This is a crime scene." Rick stood up, knocking his chair over. "No, wait, you can't. This is a setup. You're doing this because you're angry. This is retaliation." "This is justice," Arlene said, turning her back on him to look out the window. "And Rick?" The agents grabbed his arms, pulling them behind his back. The cold steel of the cuffs clicked shut, a sound much louder than the tearing of a boarding pass. "When you get to where you're going," Arlene said over her shoulder, "make sure you get in the right line." The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung shut, sealing away the chaotic image of Richard Marshall being escorted out by federal agents. The silence that followed was different from the one in the terminal. It wasn't fearful. It was the clean, sterile silence of a wound finally being stitched closed. Arlene walked back to the head of the table. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile in triumph. She looked tired, but unburdened. She looked at the remaining executives who were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, terrified that they might be next on her spreadsheet. "Let this be clear," Arlene said, her voice steady. "We are in the business of service. That means serving our customers, yes, but it also means serving the truth. Rick Marshall forgot who he worked for. He thought he worked for his ego. As of today, the culture of fear at Sky Imperial is over." She turned to the head of HR. "Reinstate the flight attendants he grounded. Pay them back wages with interest, and find that young gate supervisor, Jessica." She tried to stop him. She showed moral courage when her superior showed none. "I want her fast-tracked for the station manager position. She has the empathy this terminal lacks." 3 weeks later, the atmosphere at JFK's Terminal 4 had transformed. The velvet ropes were still there, but the tension was gone. The air smelled of coffee and relief. Rick's name had been scraped off the manager's office door, replaced by a simple plaque that read, "Jessica Miles, Station Manager." Rick himself was currently trading his tailored suits for an orange jumpsuit at the Metropolitan Detention Center, awaiting a trial where the evidence against him, thanks to Arlene's forensic team, was insurmountable. The fraud he had accused Arlene of was, in a twist of poetic irony, the very crime that would define his own legacy. He had lost his pension, his reputation, and his freedom, all because he judged a book by its cover. On a rainy Tuesday, Arlene Bisset returned to Terminal 4. She wasn't flying first class this time. She was flying economy to visit a new regional hub. She wore the same beige hoodie and the same sneakers. She approached the check-in counter. Behind it stood Mike, the security guard who had hesitated to arrest her, and Brenda, the veteran agent Rick had tried to fire. When Brenda saw Arlene, her face lit up, not with fear, but with genuine warmth. "Dr. Bisset," Brenda beamed. "Good to see you again. Heading out?" "Just a quick trip, Brenda." Arlene smiled, handing over her passport. "And please, no special treatment. Just a window seat if you have one." Brenda typed on her keyboard. "I have you in 24A. And Dr. Bisset?" "Yes." "Thank you," Brenda whispered, handing back the boarding pass, "for taking out the trash." Arlene took the boarding pass, crisp, whole, and untorn. She looked at it for a moment, remembering the sound of ripping paper that had started it all. "The trash is gone, Brenda," Arlene said softly, shouldering her bag. "Now we can finally fly." She walked toward security, joining the line with everyone else, just another passenger in the crowd, invisible to everyone except those who knew that the quiet woman in the hoodie owned the sky. Richard Marshall thought power was about shouting, intimidation, and exclusion. He believed that a title gave him the right to belittle others. But he learned the hard way that true power doesn't need to announce itself. True power is quiet, it is confident, and it is always watching. Arlene Bisset didn't just buy an airline, she bought justice. She proved that dignity is not a luxury class item. It is a fundamental right. And for Rick, he found out that when you try to humiliate someone for not fitting your mold, you might just be standing in the shadow of the person who owns the mold. In the end, kindness is free. But rudeness? Rudeness can cost you everything. What a ride! It just goes to show. You never truly know who you're dealing with, so it pays to be kind to everyone. What would you have done if you were in Arlene's shoes? Would you have fired him on the spot? Or did she handle it perfectly by letting him dig his own grave? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma served ice cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the good guys do win sometimes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.